first up, we are joined on the line by Senior Creative of the short film The Right. It's been inspired by the line of poetry by Warsan Shire, which says, "No one puts their children in a boat unless the water is safer than the land." And this particular short film was directed by Oz Arshad and was made for the charity PennyAppeal. And it's just recently won the Best Technical Award at the Mosquers as part of the Mosquers Film Festival. And we're joined on the line by Senior Creative of the short film The Right, Mariam Aitwakrim, to discuss this further. Mariam, it's a pleasure to have you on the show. Thanks for joining us tonight.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Now, on the late nights, we talk about, the difficult news stories, the lighter stories, because life is like that. It's light and shade. And I think it's fair to say for so many of us on a daily basis, we are very much looking at what is taking place in Ukraine. And there are so many that have been affected who are trying to do their bit to help in any which way that they can. And so it feels quite apt that we're talking about this short film, The Right, because it is focusing on refugees, but not on, in this case, Ukrainian refugees. So set the context of this particular short film.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, according to Amnesty International, there are currently an estimated 25.9 million refugees around the world, the highest ever recorded, and half of which are children. And I think we can all agree that refugees are unfortunately treated with varying degrees of compassion, reflecting each country's economic conditions, for example, internal tensions and foreign policy motives. But one thing we must never do is close our hearts or lose sight of the fundamental human response or ignore the needs, I guess, of some of the most desperate people around the world. And that's regardless of whether they're from Syria, Ukraine, Palestine or Afghanistan. And I guess with this film, while it's very much depicting the journey of a Syrian refugee arriving on UK shores, it's very much a representation of the story of refugees generally and what they generally have to endure on their journey to find safety.
And when you tell a story like this, I guess, and when you're looking at people who are submitting it and writing it inspired by a poem, one line of a poem, what is the difficulty in telling a story like this without it losing its message?
I mean, it poses various challenges. I think one of the main things we wanted to do is tell it as it is. I mean, the short film basically, like I said, depicts the journey of a Syrian refugee arriving on UK shores, and it's quite a heavy watch. I think I can talk on behalf of both cast and crew when I say the filming of this piece was intense. Capturing this disturbing scene of a mother washed up onto the shore following the capsizing of a boat she was travelling on, and having her frantically search for her daughter, who she believes to have lost her life along the way. I mean, I get goosebumps every time I'm watching it. And while it's very hard hitting, we basically wanted to tell the story as it is. And we decided to name it The Right, as it pays reference to Article 14 of the Declaration of Human Rights, which basically says that everyone has a right to seek and to enjoy in other countries asylum from prosecution. And this is something that is often overlooked, the fact that seeking refuge is every person's right is unfortunately not the narrative we are generally presented with. And so we really wanted to educate people to understand that, this is their human right. And going back to the quote by poet Warsan Shire, it's the sentiment behind this production, because no parent will put their child on a boat if the boat is not safer than the land, and so ultimately they don't have a choice. And that was the purpose behind this. It was to educate, it was to inform, and it was to ultimately use creative means to put a really strong message across and encourage people to support and not lose sight of it. Because what tends to happen is that when the news is no longer making the headlines, and other stories take precedence, we're still very much, as a charity, across the struggle, And so as a team, we felt it was necessary to use creative means to put across this message and to ensure people know that this is very much, many people's realities, regardless of whether it's making the headlines or not.
And when you look at the headlines and when you talk about people who are, trying to find safe haven in, different parts of the world because of their house is no longer a home anymore. Does it frustrate you that you're trying to raise this awareness and this message and show this journey, and yet there are other voices are taking precedent because it's just hate, and unfortunately people sometimes gravitate towards that that logic or that way of thinking, because they are almost talking in relation to say, I'm suffering myself. How can I give someone else refuge when I am just about surviving myself? So does that frustrate you sometimes when that narrative takes over? And then is the refugees and it's these people, the migrants or the others, which are quoted, are the problem?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, it is very, very frustrating. I think what people don't recognise is, there's this idea around, what's associated with the word refugees, and what many people don't realise is that these refugees don't want to be here. They don't want to be travelling to all of these countries. They don't want to leave their homes and what they know and what, they've grown up, what they've built, their families, their communities, like that's their livelihood. To move away from that, they've been forced to do that. And so many people don't recognise that. And it is very, very frustrating that, this is not a choice. It hasn't been a choice that they've been able to make. They've had to move to find safety, And
how do you find an audience, number one, that's probably following that narrative that, the one where, is sometimes, I guess, not favourable towards refugees or the empathy that should come from what you just said, from human nature, just show empathy towards these people who don't really want to be there. How do you find that voice and that audience so that you can get this message across, even through film?
Yeah, I mean, it is a challenge, It is a challenge, and it's something that it's the reason behind creating a piece like this.
Right.
And the fact that a production like this made it to the renowned Mosquers Film Festival is a great achievement for us. Of course, it's a bittersweet situation where, we really wish we didn't have to create content like this. That's ultimately the goal of a charity organisation. We want to get to a point where we don't need to provide films like this to share a story. But the fact that it reached a film festival such as Mosquers is great, because that's how we're reaching a wider audience. The Mosquers Film Festival is the world's largest showcase of Muslim art, and it aims to build bridges through showcasing talent and the diverse Muslim experience. And I think it's really important that Muslims are given a platform to be heard and to share their creative art and unique experiences, because nobody else is going to tell your story. And so, especially when the message is concerning serious issues such as the one that we're speaking about. So ultimately, it is using any means possible, and in this instance, it's creative means, it's film, to really get the message out there and reach audiences that you wouldn't necessarily be able to reach on a day-to-day basis. But as an organisation, PennyAppeal is expanding, we're growing. We've been around since 2009, and we are reaching, like, internationally, we are reaching many audiences, and we're very, very proud of that.
I know Sunny's touched upon it just slightly, but there was an article last month in the New York Times, and the headline was, "For Ukraine's refugee, Europe opens doors that were shut to others." And the article went into and discussed and looked at, what has happened in the last kind of 6 years around asylum. At least 1.3 million people, mostly from Syria, Iraq and Afghanistan, have applied for asylum in Europe, which is, as we know, in 2015, during what has been regarded the worst refugee crisis since World War II. And for, if you look at the news articles of last year and the year before, all we've obviously seen in a lot of the articles is that we're dealing with a refugee crisis. And yet this article kind of delves into, looks at the fact that now, and absolutely rightly so, but a lot of European states are now willing to take in Ukrainians, whereas in the past they have not taken other refugees. There was the professor from Northeastern University in Boston, Serena Parek, who did an interview with the New York Times, and she said, on the other hand, it's hard not to see that Ukrainians are white, mostly Christian and Europeans, and so in a sense, the xenophobia that's really arisen in the last 10 years, particularly after 2015, is not at play in this crisis in the way that it has been for refugees coming from the Middle East and from Africa. We've seen articles, even the BBC has covered and talked about some of the racism that is being faced by individuals at the border from Ukraine who are people of colour. And so I just wonder, with this particular short film, was it important for you to kind of share that story for those that are refugees who are people of colour?
Absolutely. I mean, absolutely. Like I said, in terms of the support that we offer, in terms of what we respond to. We respond to the needy, regardless of where you're from or what your background or religion is. Like, that's what we stand for as a charity organisation. And so regardless, like I said, whether you're from Syria, Ukraine, Palestine, or Afghanistan, we will still respond in the same way. And we encourage others to ultimately do the same. But sadly, and it's very frustrating that, as you just mentioned, it's not equal. The response in terms of whether it's refugees from Syria or Ukraine or Palestine, the response is different, and we've seen it, and it's been very blatant. And I guess, like I mentioned, there are varying degrees of compassion, and this does reflect each country's economic conditions, like I did mention, and foreign policy motives. And it's very, very sad because it goes far beyond a person in need. There's so many levels to it. There's so many politics behind it, and that is a frustration that we have, and it is something that we will continue to fight in the work that we do, and hope that others will do the same.
And what is the plans, I guess, for 2022 for the charity, and also to raise more awareness for all different aspects which the charity actually are helping in so many different ways? It's not just this aspect. There's also the help that Penny Appeal did here in the UK during the pandemic, trying to help people with food and all of that kind of stuff. So what is the plans for 2022?
Absolutely. I mean, the plan for 2022 is to respond where the need is, wherever the need may be, where Penny Appeal are striving to be there and support those most in need. I mean, in terms of, the refugee work that we do, we've supported over 150,000 refugees internationally. We, as part of what we stand for as a charity, is that we do work in the UK and abroad. For us, charity starts at home, but we ultimately offer support both here in the UK and abroad. So in terms of internationally, we've provided long-term infrastructure in Rohingya refugee camps, for example, such as water pipes, medical centres, child-friendly spaces. We've set up mobile health clinics in Syria and Palestine. We've built therapeutic feeding centres in Yemen, and we've recently launched our Rebuild Syria campaign, which is building permanent £2,000 homes for Syrian refugees. So there's lots and lots we're doing internationally. And in the UK, I mean, we've had over 25,000 contacts with refugees over 7 years in the UK alone. We've worked with over 57 partners across 5 regions of the UK. And as part of our work with Afghan families more recently arriving in the UK, we supported 370 families. So there's many things that people don't realise when refugees come to UK shores. They come here with hardly any belongings. They haven't found their feet, and they need support. They need basic necessities. So we were providing these families with cash grants, for example, so that they could buy, basic essentials like food and clothes and toiletries, baby items, and, things like Oyster card, to get about. So the basic things that people need to kind of get them going. But as part of, we offer loads of support. We partner with various organisations that provide support with, therapy, like, providing food, hygiene kits. Like I said, there's lots that we do with the various organisations we partner with. And I mean, in terms of 2022, we will continue our work and support for refugees both here in the UK and abroad, and and anything else that comes up. I mean, ultimately, we're working to support those most in need, regardless of where they're from, or what their background is.
And I guess I have to ask you, if anybody wants to get in touch with the organisation, want to, see the movie, is it accessible now online, or is there any way that they can actually donate towards the charity?
Yes, absolutely. PennyAppeal.org. You can watch the movie via our channel, via our platform, and donate directly on the website.
Fantastic. Again, those details, PennyAppeal.org for all the information. Mariam, a real pleasure having you on the show. Thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. Take care.
Thanks again. Mariam Wakram, who is the senior creative of the short film The Right. If you'd like further details, go to PennyAppeal.org.